Hello, so I found more information regarding the Cabeiri, this one being a Sumerian prototype referencing specifically the fall of man, and this is from Stephen Herbert Langton. As you can see here, it's critical notes upon the Epic of Paradise, Shillita reader of Assyriology in the University of Oxford, which is a well known Illuminati pipeline where they host the Rhodes Scholarship Program. So, what that very likely means is that, particularly given all of his knowledge in these subject fields, that he was either connected with the mystery rites, or at the very least, they certainly have referenced him a good bit. Either way, um, like I said, what this speaks to is the notion of the fall of man, and interestingly, what gets covered here is a version where Inky, who's usually seen as the benevolent of the two brothers, Enlil and Inky, Inky is actually portrayed as the sort of devil, so to speak, that out of jealousy causes the downfall of an individual named Tagtug, for whatever reason, like just good old jealousy. So what's it say here? Earlier pages of the volume of the journal contain articles by Professors Prince and Jastrow upon my recent volume, Sumerian Epic of Paradise, The Flood and the Fall of Man. Okay, so generally what this is meant for is to address textual criticisms from one of his earlier publications. But I'm going to skip to the specific parts that I'm talking about now as a reference. I've already uploaded a video talking about Inzag, Nabu, and Mercury, because Inzag was the Sumerian Mercury. He was the Nabu of Dilmun. So that you can see this real quick, some of the importance of this. Dilmun, 33 islands, right? It's often described as an archipelago of 33 islands. There's more than 33 islands. There's here it is, 51 natural islands and an additional 33 artificial islands. And as you can see here, they specifically listed this, the Lost Paradise of Dilmun. So the reason that they're talking about Dilmun, as I said, this is supposed to be like a prototypical paradisical Garden of Eden in ancient Sumer, off the eastern coast of Arabia, within the Persian Gulf. And Inzag, as I've shown in a previous video, is a slightly different myth, but interestingly still references Dilmun in these characters. Inzag is sent by the mother goddess, which is the tradition of the Cabeiri that comes to later be associated with Samothrace and moreover with all of these mystery rites. And that's why I keep honing in on the Cabeiri. I cannot stress enough how important it is to understand this concept if you actually want to understand the hypostasis of world religion. So Inzag is specifically the eighth being. If you've seen anything I've talked about regarding this, you should have a really good understanding by now that the eighth being, also known as Eshmun, is the dying and rising god. This is like the culmination of the group, otherwise referred to as Hephaestus or Ta, Toth, right? So this is Ophiuchus, who comes to be known as Asclepius, or Eshmun, who is also associated with Hermes. I know that in the exoteric traditions, none of that really makes sense. It's because those are all a bunch of broken up traditions that don't really explain much. You have to have the esoteric understanding. And if you've seen what I've talked about, I'm not saying this stuff for no reason. There's a reason that I pull up all these references so you can see where I'm getting it from. All right, so this is the mystery tradition. Now, let's find Tagtug. So I'm not going to read this entire thing. I'm just going to show bits and pieces so that you can verify. It is Inky. Sorry. Let me go to one-page view. Thus, it is Enki who brought about the loss of eternal life by placing a tree in the garden. The text does not mention his having forbidden it, and that is precisely the point of the theologians who attributed the fall of man to the jealousy of Enki as in the Adapa myth. Tagtug was not to know that loss of eternal life would follow upon his eating from this unnamed tree. But Ninhursag foresees the result at once, and hence pronounces the curse. The text also does not state that Tagtug ate of this plant, but that is the obvious reference. Unfortunately, texts of this kind are so abbreviated in detail that the succession of ideas baffles the decipherer for many hours. This account of the fall of man through his innocently eating from the fated and unnamed plant placed in the garden by the jealous water god is purposely abbreviated by the schoolmen. That indescribable disaster of humanity formed a subject whose details were apparently too painful to be dwelt upon. In any case, the curse by the mother god as follows: the phase of life until he dies shall he see. Also, realize that Enki is a trickster deity. Just as a side note, man loses here the longevity and perfect health of the pre-Diluvian age. That is the plain statement of our text, and it is apparently the result of eating from a plant. Here's a little side note that he writes down here. The fall might also be the final penalty for the sin which brought on the flood. If we place that construction upon the contents of the passage, then the sin of mankind in failing to show the proper respect to the gods brought about not only the end of paradise by the flood, but also the loss of perfect health and longevity. In view of the fact that the curse of Ninhursag bringing about the fall follows upon a list of medicinal plants which he is permitted to eat, and one fateful plant, of which there is no further description, makes the inference well nigh certain that the fall is to be attributed to the eating of this plant purposely placed in the garden by the jealous god Enki. Alright, so here's, I think, another little summation. The textual criticisms ensure my original interpretation. The tablet contains a description of paradise, the ejection of mankind by a flood, the deliverance of a pious man, Tagtug, who became a gardener and receives instructions as to which plants he shall eat. Enki, out of jealousy, plans to deprive him of immortality by placing a fated plant in the garden. After the ejection from paradise and the loss of perpetual good health, sorry, I said that kind of weird, and the loss of perpetual good health, the gods send 8 divine patrons to aid man in his struggle for existence. And there it is, right? The gods send 8 divine patrons to aid man in his struggle for existence, but it's not done yet, because it's going to come back to what I've said before. The revised text contains a clear reference to the moral degeneration of man. Here, the gods send a divine patron, Inzaga, to aid the weakened intelligence of mankind. Shale, in his brilliant critique of the passage before the French Academy, defined a reference to the moral fall of man in this line. This confirms my interpretation and proves that my critics were entirely in error in their attempts to place an unnatural exegesis upon this line. The deity created to protect mankind against his moral and intellectual depravity is a form of Nebo, patron deity of Dilmun. That is Inzaga, right? And this is, I was talking about this months ago. This is what I was saying. This is why I pointed out that Inzag, in a completely different myth, basically, it's called Enki and Ninhursag. I've uploaded it before. Inzag is specifically the 8th of these deities that are born from plants that are planted by the mother goddess Ninhursag. So that is the tradition of the Cabeiri, right? That comes to be recognized in Samothrace, said to have been brought to Samothrace by the pre-Greek Pelasgians, and nobody knows where the fuck they came from. there's all this conjecture about the Egyptians or the Phoenicians or the Anatolians. Nobody knows, right? So Inzag was specifically the eighth being associated with Nebo, associated as the Lord of Dilmun, the Lord of this ancient Sumerian paradise. And I specifically said that's the Cabeiri, right? So now I find this reference where he's saying 8 divine patrons are sent to aid man, and Inzaga specifically is the god that helps with wisdom and morality. The deity created to protect mankind against his moral and intellectual depravity is a form of Nebo, who is Hermes, right? Patron deity of Dilmun, which is why Eshmun is associated with Hermes. It's why Cadmilus is associated with Hermes. Let's see. We have here the Sumerian Epic of Paradise and the theological explanation of the fall of man. And then let's see. Nebo. The god who sends wisdom is Inzag. Nebo. In line 41 has the variant longer epithet Inzaga, Lord who exercises intelligence, title of Nebo. Okay. So that's the essence of it. Let me go to the last page real quick. Okay, that was the last page that I had already read. Alright, so hopefully now it's starting to make sense, right? Because this is the Eshmun, or Ophiuchus character. This is why all of this stuff comes together, because it is a very, very ancient tradition associated specifically with the crossing, which you can see with the ecliptic, with the crossing of the Milky Way and the ecliptic, right? The path of the planets or the astral planet to travel, with this Christ figure standing at the crossing, with this representing the Red Sea. Pancake, chill out, buddy. Chill out. Thank you. This is why you have, and I found a reference to this just a short while ago from Tammuz and Ishtar, where you have Nebo between Nana or Nina and Nebo. It's an association, that is, between Nana or Nina and Nebo, the god of prophecy. For this reason, a star in the breast of Scorpio was identified with Nebo, because that mother goddess figure is associated with Scorpio, is what he's saying. So for this reason, because this is associated with the mother goddess, you have in the bosom, you have Nebo, the god of prophecy, right? So there's a whole thing going on here with all of these different placings. But this is why Antares, it's not Antares that I have, but Antares that I'm circling around right here, comes to be associated with Nesu, the original Sumerian dying and rising god. The god Nesu, known almost entirely by his star Antares and Scorpio, also identified with Nebo, right? That's the recurrent theme here. That's your Inzag, that's your, hopefully it's making sense, right? Like, you should be picking up what I'm putting down. Myth of the mother goddess and her son and husband who died yearly and descended for her time to the underworld generally appears in Sumerian, especially Babylonian religion. But the original form of this myth in Sumerian seems to have been associated with the cult of Ninturn and her Sagariru and her son and husband Nesu. which is the star Antares, which is also Nebo, which is also Inshak, which is just this overall image. That's who this is, right? That's why you have authors like R. Brown June. I think it's either this one or the other one. 1 second. Eshman the Eighth. I think it's this one. The Snake Holder. Eshman, a native Phoenician god. As Damascus calls him Ishkel, the lively fire, because he's a fire god. Right? The fire god, a god of healing, called by the Greeks Epios. Figured as snake holder on the Phoenician coins of Khosra with the sacred serpents. Right? This is a Fucus he's talking about here. But in case there's any doubt, I'm just looking for the more direct reference. The Phoenician deity, divinity Eshman, 8th and highest of the Cabeiri. The 7, Cabeiri, the 7 plus Eshman. Okay. But this isn't actually the article, it's this one. In this list, the snake is made a separate constellation. A Fucus huge, Asclepius Eshman, the 8th of the Cabeiri, who stands upon Scorpios, the 8th sign of the zodiac. See what I mean? Like, I've been putting this stuff together for a hot ass minute now. And I'm telling you, I don't see anybody else. I mean, I've seen plenty of people talk about the Dying and Rising God. I've seen plenty of people talking about the Cabeiri generally. But for some reason, nobody else seems to be putting it together like this. And I'm telling you right now that this is what it's all about. This is the hypostasis of religion. This isn't a fucking coincidence, anything like that. Right? So, I don't know. Hopefully more people come to realize it given time, because I can't state how significant this really is. All right, that's all I got. I'm gonna keep. I don't want to keep just droning on. So, much love. Take it easy.